He memorized my work schedule, made me dinner for months, then hijacked my boardroom presentation by projecting fake emails accusing me of fraud. When I said I built the entire framework from scratch, he rolled his eyes and muttered, "It's not like you contributed that much." I just stared at him. That was 2 years ago. This morning, he was sentenced to 18 months in prison, and his entire startup disappeared overnight. I used to believe that women were destined to feel love more profoundly than men, until Daniel entered my life. Daniel and I had shared 7 years together. He was truly every woman's ideal partner. He maintained an impeccably clean home, always handled the dishes when I cooked, and even committed my work schedule to memory to ensure dinner was ready after my late meetings. However, he consistently turned everything into a competition, like the day I earned a promotion to senior analyst. Immediately, he sought management positions at competing companies. At the time, I saw this as potentially positive, thinking it meant we simply motivated each other to excel. It's amusing now, looking back. A few months ago, I was chosen to present our new AI integration strategy to the board of directors, including the CEO. Imagine the junior employee who began in the mailroom 8 years prior, because that was me until recently. But now, I had a career I was genuinely proud of and, frankly, eager to showcase. I informed Daniel the moment he arrived home. I recall wanting to rehearse my presentation with him, discussing how we'd flawlessly answer every question. "Honey, I don't think you have much to present. I mean, it's not like you've truly contributed that much to the project." For a second, I honestly thought he was joking. I reminded him that, for one, I had literally developed the entire integration framework, spending 9 months building the algorithms from scratch. I believe he realized his misstep because he immediately started backtracking, claiming he'd just had a long day and would be delighted to assist me with practice. I was incredibly tired myself, so I simply accepted his apology and noted the presentation date. I meticulously prepared for weeks. My slides, data visualizations, and speaking notes were all perfectly refined. When the day arrived, I gazed at my reflection, knowing I had earned this moment. I expected a "you'll do great" from Daniel, or even a comment about my thorough preparation would have been nice. Instead, he inquired if I could diminish my expertise so as not to make the male executives uncomfortable. I refused, and he merely rolled his eyes. The next thing I knew, he was retrieving his laptop and making secretive phone calls. Then he simply left. I assumed he had just gone to get coffee, and I finished getting ready. For the first time ever, I understood what it meant to feel like a true professional. That is, until I reached the office, because Daniel was nowhere to be found. I tried texting and calling him for 30 straight minutes, but there was no reply. I don't even know what I was thinking at this point, but regardless, I headed to the boardroom. By then, I wasn't even concerned about Daniel. I was focused on the presentation, my career-defining moment, the project that would prove I belonged in tech despite everyone who claimed I lacked the technical background. The familiar resolve I'd felt throughout my entire career steadied my nerves, and I entered that building ready to excel. But when I walked in, the first person I saw wasn't the CEO, it was Daniel. I caught him mid-conversation with the board members, discussing his concerns about my project's security vulnerabilities and how I'd overlooked critical flaws. Even when he saw me, he continued the conversation. He only stopped when the CEO requested he take a seat. I immediately attempted to begin my presentation, but the damage was done. Every slide I displayed, Daniel would interject with a question that was merely a thinly veiled attempt to undermine my work. When I explained the cost savings, he'd mention hidden expenses I hadn't considered. When I presented the efficiency metrics, he'd bring up potential system failures. That's when my body froze, because he had retrieved his own laptop and was projecting emails, fake emails he'd created, showing me admitting to data manipulation and cutting corners on security protocols. The board members were whispering, looking at me with suspicion. For a moment, I felt utterly defeated. This is the nightmare every ambitious woman fears, the moment their own partner sabotages their success out of jealousy. But before I could collapse, the CTO spoke up. "Mr. Richardson, these emails are intriguing, but I'm curious. Why do they all have metadata indicating they were created yesterday at 11:47 p.m.? And why do they reference a server architecture we discontinued 3 years ago?" My heart pounded. I saw panic flicker in Daniel's eyes before he began stammering about technical errors. But the CTO wasn't finished. She pulled up the genuine email chains, the ones where I meticulously documented every decision, every security measure, every test result. Also fascinating that you claim to have these concerns when our security team, with whom Ms. Sarah worked directly, signed off on every protocol. In fact, they called it the most comprehensive integration they'd ever seen. I wanted to vanish, but then something wonderful occurred. The CEO rose and asked Daniel to leave immediately, mentioning something about corporate espionage charges. My eyes met Daniel's, and even as his were filled with shock, mine were filled with relief. Instinctively, I turned back to my presentation. I simply wanted to move forward. The board apologized profusely and asked me to continue, so I did what I always do. I delivered the best presentation of my life, because I knew there was only one way to win, only one force in my favor, and that was the truth. It always emerges in the data. I couldn't tell you what became of Daniel after security escorted him out, but what happened next proved that some individuals don't accept defeat gracefully. The security team marched Daniel through the glass doors while I clicked through my remaining slides. My hands trembled slightly as I explained the implementation timeline, but the board members leaned forward with genuine interest. Now, the CFO inquired about scalability. The head of operations wanted specifics about the training modules, real questions from people who genuinely sought to understand my work. 20 minutes later, I exited that boardroom with full approval and an increased budget. My phone vibrated constantly in my pocket, but I ignored it. The head of IT stopped me in the hallway and shook my hand, telling me she'd never witnessed someone handle sabotage with such composure. I thanked her and went straight to the restroom, where I locked myself in a stall and allowed myself to shake for 5 full minutes. When I finally checked my phone, I had 47 missed calls from Daniel. The texts began angrily, then pleadingly, then threateningly. I blocked his number and contacted building security to ensure he had been removed from the premises. They confirmed he'd been escorted to his car and instructed not to return. I thought that would be the end of it. I packed up my office supplies and drove home in silence, my presentation materials still scattered across the passenger seat. The apartment felt different when I entered. Daniel's coffee mug sat on the counter, his running shoes by the door. 7 years of shared life suddenly felt like evidence at a crime scene. I spent that evening boxing up his belongings. His clothes went into garbage bags, his books into cardboard boxes. I found the lease agreement in our filing cabinet. Thankfully, it was solely in my name. I'd insisted on that when we moved in, back when I thought I was being financially prudent. Now it felt as though my past self had somehow known. The next morning, I changed the locks before heading to work. The locksmith made small talk about the weather while I stood there in my pajamas, holding my second cup of coffee. He handed me the new keys, and I felt something shift, a tiny piece of control returning. At the office, people treated me differently, not poorly, just cautiously, as if I might break if they said the wrong thing. My manager pulled me aside and asked if I needed time off. I declined, saying work was the only thing that felt normal. She nodded and mentioned that they had already begun implementing my framework. The pilot program would launch next week. That afternoon, our biggest client called. They'd heard about the presentation from someone on the board and wanted to discuss expanding their contract to include the new AI integration. I should have been thrilled. Instead, I felt numb as I took notes and promised to send over a proposal by Friday. Daniel's first move came via LinkedIn. He had messaged every single one of my professional contacts with a meticulously crafted narrative, how I'd stolen his ideas, how he'd tried to protect the company from my reckless ambitions, how the board had been deceived by falsified data. Most people ignored him, but a few reached out to me with screenshots, concerned and confused. I documented everything and forwarded it to HR. They initiated an investigation and assured me they would handle it. But Daniel wasn't finished. He created fake social media accounts and began commenting on every article that mentioned our company. He posted in industry forums about security vulnerabilities and AI systems, always hinting at insider knowledge about a certain company's rushed implementation. My team lead, Jonathan, discovered the posts first. He showed them to me during our morning stand-up, his face tight with anger. I recognized Daniel's writing style immediately, the same condescending tone he'd used in the boardroom. Jonathan offered to respond to set the record straight. I told him to leave it alone. Engaging would only worsen the situation. But it did get worse anyway. Daniel contacted our competitors, offering to share proprietary information about our AI framework. One of them, a friend from my previous job, called me immediately. She forwarded his emails, desperate messages promising insider details about our algorithms and implementation strategies. She'd already reported him to their legal team. I started sleeping poorly. Every morning brought new challenges to address. Daniel emailed journalists, attempting to pitch a story about corporate espionage and stolen intellectual property. He contacted university professors whose papers I'd cited, claiming I'd misrepresented their research. He even reached out to the professional organization where I'd recently been invited to speak, warning them about my questionable ethics. Through it all, I continued working. The pilot program launched on schedule. The client loved the initial results. My team rallied around me, staying late to double-check every piece of documentation, every line of code. They didn't have to. They chose to because they believed in the work we were doing. The CTO, Victoria, became an unexpected ally. She had dealt with something similar early in her career, a male colleague who couldn't handle her success. She taught me to document everything, to build a paper trail that would speak for itself. She also connected me with the company's legal team, who sent Daniel a cease and desist letter. That only made him angrier. He appeared at industry networking events, knowing I'd be there. He positioned himself near the registration table, telling anyone who would listen how he'd been wrongfully terminated for asking tough questions. Security removed him twice. The third time, the event organizers banned him permanently. My sister called one evening, confused. Daniel had somehow found her work email and sent her a lengthy message about how I'd changed and how he was worried about my mental health. She forwarded it to me with a single question: "What the hell is going on?" I spent an hour on the phone explaining everything. She offered to fly out, but I told her I was managing. Managing it meant working 12-hour days to stay ahead of the damage. It meant constantly checking my email for new attacks. It meant jumping every time my phone rang, wondering what fresh torment Daniel had unleashed. My manager noticed the stress and pulled me aside again. This time, she didn't ask if I needed time off. She told me to take it. I refused. Taking time off felt like letting him win. Instead, I immersed myself deeper into the work. The AI framework needed refinements. The client wanted additional features. My team needed guidance. I could control these things. I could perfect them. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Nathan, one of our junior developers, had been monitoring the fake social media accounts Daniel created. He noticed patterns in the posting times, the IP addresses, the language used. He'd compiled a comprehensive report showing how all the attacks traced back to the same source. More importantly, he'd found evidence that Daniel had accessed our systems after his termination using old credentials that hadn't been properly revoked. This changed everything. Unauthorized system access was a federal crime. The legal team moved swiftly. Within days, Daniel received more than just a cease and desist. He was facing potential criminal charges. The attacks stopped immediately, but the damage lingered. Some industry contacts remained suspicious. A few speaking opportunities quietly disappeared. The stress had worn me down to nothing. I'd lost 15 pounds and developed a constant headache. My apartment felt like a bunker where I hid between battles. Victoria noticed first. She scheduled a one-on-one and didn't discuss work at all. Instead, she asked when I'd last taken a real break, when I'd last done something purely for enjoyment. I couldn't recall. She made me promise to take a long weekend. No emails, no phone calls, just rest. That weekend saved me. I drove to the coast and spent 3 days walking on the beach, eating proper meals, sleeping without setting an alarm. I turned off my phone and allowed myself to exist without constantly checking for new attacks. The ocean didn't care about corporate drama. The waves just kept coming, steady and indifferent. When I returned, something had shifted. The pilot program had exceeded every metric. The client signed an expanded contract. My team had handled a minor crisis without me, proving the framework could stand on its own. They'd also adorned my desk with flowers and a card signed by the entire department. Daniel made one last attempt. He sent a letter to my apartment, not threatening, just pathetic. Pages of rambling about how I'd misunderstood him, how he'd only wanted to help, how we could resolve things if I just dropped the charges. I photographed every page and sent them to the legal team. Then I shredded the letter and disposed of the trash. The final vindication arrived at the quarterly all-hands meeting. The CEO stood before the entire company and highlighted the AI integration as the quarter's greatest success. He mentioned me by name, praising not just the technical achievement, but the grace under pressure. The room erupted in applause. I sat there, surrounded by colleagues who'd become friends, and finally allowed myself to feel proud. After the meeting, Victoria pulled me aside. The company wished to promote me to Director of AI Integration. It meant leading a larger team, working with bigger clients, and yes, a significant raise. But more than that, it meant they'd witnessed everything Daniel tried to do and still chose to invest in me. I accepted immediately. That evening, I called my sister and shared the news. She shrieked so loudly I had to hold the phone away from my ear. Then she asked the question I'd been avoiding. How are you truly doing? For the first time in months, I could answer honestly. I'm good. Actually good. The truth does emerge in the data, but sometimes it takes longer than you'd prefer. Sometimes you have to contend for it. Sometimes you have to endure assault from someone you once completely trusted. But if you keep showing up, keep doing the work, keep letting your results speak for themselves, eventually the noise dissipates and the truth remains. Daniel eventually pleaded guilty to unauthorized system access. He received probation and was prohibited from contacting me or the company. I heard through industry contacts that he'd relocated to another state, attempting to start anew where his reputation hadn't preceded him. I hoped he'd learn something, but mostly I just didn't care anymore. My new team was brilliant. We expanded the AI framework to 3 more departments. The success garnered attention from industry publications, the positive kind of attention this time. They wanted to feature our work, interview me about the implementation process. I agreed to all of it. The apartment felt different now. I'd completely redecorated, erasing every trace of those 7 years. New furniture, new art, new everything. It wasn't about forgetting. It was about constructing something entirely my own. On the anniversary of that boardroom presentation, Victoria took me to lunch. We didn't discuss Daniel, or the attacks, or how dire things had become. Instead, we talked about the future, the new projects on the horizon, the team we were building, the problems we'd solve. As we walked back to the office, she mentioned something almost casually. You know, when that whole mess was happening, I never doubted you'd get through it. You want to know why? I nodded, curious. Because you never stopped working. You never stopped improving the framework. Even when he was attacking you from every angle, you kept making the product better. That's how I knew you'd win. People like him can only tear down. People like you build things that last. I pondered that for the rest of the day. About constructing things that endure. About weathering storms not by retaliating, but by pressing forward. About how the best revenge truly is simply living well and performing exceptional work. That night, I arrived home to find a package on my doorstep. No return address. For a moment, my heart raced. Then I saw the handwriting. My team lead Jonathan's messy scrawl. Inside was a framed photograph of our team at the launch party, all of us grinning foolishly, exhausted but proud. The note simply read, "For someone who builds things that last." I hung it on my office wall the next morning, a reminder that I hadn't survived alone, that while Daniel had attempted to isolate and destroy me, I'd been surrounded by people who saw through his deceptions, people who valued genuine work over theatrical accusations. The story could conclude there. Victory achieved, villain defeated, career flourishing. But real life doesn't resolve so neatly. There were still difficult days, moments when I'd see something that reminded me of those 7 years and feel the betrayal anew. Times when imposter syndrome whispered that perhaps he'd been correct about something. But those moments passed more quickly each time, because I had data now, tangible results, a track record that spoke louder than any accusation, a team that trusted me, leadership that supported me, and most importantly, the understanding that I'd survived someone's worst intentions and emerged stronger. The AI framework became the bedrock for the company's digital transformation. We won industry awards. I spoke at conferences, the very ones where Daniel had tried to ruin my reputation. People who'd once received his desperate emails now sought my advice on their own implementations. Success, I learned, isn't just about achieving your objectives. It's about preserving your integrity when someone tries to corrupt your narrative. It's about continuing to build when someone else is determined to demolish. It's about trusting that good work speaks for itself, even when someone is shouting falsehoods. Daniel did teach me something valuable, though not in the way he intended. He showed me that I was more resilient than I knew, that my work could withstand scrutiny, that the community I'd cultivated through years of honest effort would rally when threatened, that truth, supported by data and determination, always prevails in the end. I still work late sometimes, but not out of fear anymore. Now, it's because I love what I'm creating. My team jokes that I've become the company's secret weapon. Point me at a problem, and I'll framework it into submission. They don't realize how close that is to the truth, how resolving complex technical challenges feels like reclaiming parts of myself that those months of attacks had tried to steal. The last I heard, Daniel was working at a small startup, keeping a low profile. Part of me hopes he's genuinely changed. Most of me doesn't think about him at all. He's become what he always should have been, a footnote in my story, not a main character. Because this was never truly about him. It was about the work, the innovation, the problems we could solve with the right approach and enough determination. It was about demonstrating that merit matters, that good ideas, implemented well, can transform organizations. It was about constructing something larger than any individual ego or petty jealousy. My apartment is vibrant now, plants everywhere, art from local artists, photos from team celebrations and conference victories. It's a space that reflects who I've become, someone who builds, who grows, who refuses to let anyone else's limitations define my potential. Sometimes young women in tech reach out, having heard fragments of my story through the industry grapevine. They seek advice on handling competitive colleagues or dealing with sabotage. I tell them what Victoria told me. Document everything, cultivate your network, trust your work, and never, ever stop building just because someone else is trying to tear you down. The truth always emerges in the data, But sometimes you have to safeguard that truth, nurture it, and allow its space to flourish despite the surrounding chaos. Sometimes you have to be both the analyst and the guardian, the innovator and the defender. Sometimes you have to learn that the person you thought supported your dreams might be the very one attempting to destroy them. But when you endure that, when you stand on the other side with your integrity intact and your achievements undeniable, that's when you realize the competition was never truly about them. It was about becoming the person who could weather any storm and still deliver excellence. And that person? She's unstoppable. The next morning brought a new challenge. Our biggest competitor had just announced they were developing their own AI integration system, and they'd hired someone with insider knowledge as their lead consultant. My stomach dropped when I read the press release. They didn't name names, but I knew exactly who they meant. Daniel had found a way back into the game. My phone rang immediately. Victoria's voice was steady but concerned. She'd already scheduled an emergency meeting with legal and wanted me there in 20 minutes. I grabbed my laptop and headed to the conference room, my mind racing through all the proprietary information Daniel might have retained. The legal team outlined our options. We could pursue an injunction, but proving he was using our intellectual property would be difficult without concrete evidence. They recommended we focus on protecting our current advantages, accelerating our rollout, filing patents on key innovations, and documenting everything meticulously. I spent the rest of the day with my team, reviewing our security protocols and identifying which aspects of our framework were most vulnerable. Jonathan suggested we implement new encryption methods for our core algorithms. Nathan proposed creating decoy documentation that would reveal if someone was accessing our systems illegitimately. We worked until midnight, fueled by determination and excessive coffee. The next few weeks became a race. Every morning, I'd check industry news to see what our competitor was announcing. Every afternoon, I'd meet with my team to ensure we stayed ahead. We pushed updates faster than ever before, each one making our system more sophisticated and harder to replicate. Then came the conference invitation. Tech Forward, the industry's premier event, wanted me to present our AI framework at their annual summit, the same summit where our competitor would be unveiling their new system. My first instinct was to decline. The thought of being in the same building as Daniel made my skin crawl. Victoria wouldn't let me back down. She sat across from my desk, arms crossed, and reminded me that hiding would only fuel speculation. The best defense was to show up and demonstrate why our system was superior. She was right, of course. I accepted the invitation. Preparing for the conference consumed my life. I refined every slide, anticipated every possible question, and worked with our legal team to ensure I could discuss our innovations without revealing protected information. My team volunteered to attend as support, creating demos that would showcase our framework's capabilities in real time. 3 days before the conference, I received an email from an unknown address. The subject line simply read, "You might want to see this." Inside was a link to a tech blog post titled, "The Real Story Behind AI Integration, An Insider's Perspective." My hands trembled as I clicked through. The post was anonymous, but Daniel's writing style was unmistakable. He portrayed himself as a whistleblower, claiming he'd discovered serious flaws in a major company's AI system, but was silenced when he tried to report them. He described scenarios that were distorted versions of reality, meetings where I'd supposedly dismissed security concerns, decisions I'd allegedly made against expert advice. I forwarded the post to legal immediately. Within hours, they'd contacted the blog's hosting service with a cease and desist order. But the damage was spreading. Other blogs picked up the story, comment sections filled with speculation about which company and which system he meant. My team rallied again. They created a comprehensive technical document that addressed every concern raised in the post, complete with audit trails and third-party security assessments. We didn't mention Daniel by name. We didn't have to. The data spoke for itself. The morning of the conference, I awoke at 4 a.m., unable to sleep. I reviewed my presentation one more time, then tried to eat breakfast but could barely manage a bite. The drive to the convention center felt both too long and too short. I saw him the moment I walked into the venue. Daniel stood near the registration desk, wearing an expensive suit and talking animatedly with a group of executives. He looked different, thinner, with dark circles under his eyes that makeup couldn't quite conceal. When our eyes met across the lobby, he smirked. I turned away and focused on setting up our booth. My team had arrived early, and together we assembled our demo stations and tested every piece of equipment twice. Attendees started filtering in, and soon we were busy explaining our framework to interested visitors. The first sign of trouble came during a demo for a potential client. Mid-presentation, our system started glitching. Error messages flashed across the screen. The client frowned as I frantically tried to troubleshoot. Nathan quickly switched to our backup system, but the damage was done. The client thanked us politely and moved on. We discovered the problem within minutes. Someone had been attempting to access our demo system remotely, flooding it with requests designed to cause failures. The attacks were sophisticated but had one flaw. They revealed the attacker's pattern. Nathan started tracking while I continued with presentations, trying to maintain composure despite the sabotage. My presentation was scheduled for 2 p.m. in the main auditorium. At noon, I received a message from the conference organizers. There had been concerns raised about the content of my presentation. They wanted to review my slides before allowing me on stage. I met with them immediately, bringing Victoria as support. They showed us an email they received warning that my presentation would contain stolen intellectual property and false performance metrics. The email was anonymous but claimed to have proof that would be revealed during the Q&A session. Victoria handled it brilliantly. She provided our legal documentation, third-party audits, and patent filings. She also pointed out that anonymous accusations without evidence shouldn't derail scheduled presentations. The organizers agreed, but warned they'd cut my microphone if anything inappropriate occurred. I returned to our booth to find my team huddled around Nathan's laptop. He'd traced the system attacks to a specific IP range, one associated with our competitor's network. More importantly, he'd found something else. The attack patterns matched those from months ago when Daniel had accessed our systems after termination. We had him. I called legal immediately. They advised me to proceed with my presentation as planned while they handled the evidence. I spent the next hour in a conference room, breathing deeply and reminding myself why I was there. Not to fight Daniel, but to showcase the work we'd built. At 1:45, I walked to the auditorium. The room was packed. Word had spread about potential drama, and everyone wanted to watch. I saw Daniel in the third row, surrounded by his new colleagues. He was typing rapidly on his phone, occasionally glancing up at me with that same smirk. I began my presentation by thanking everyone for attending. Then I delved into the technical details, explaining how our framework operated, the problems it solved, and the results our clients had achieved. I let the data tell the story, slide by slide, metric by metric. The first interruption came 15 minutes in. A hand shot up from Daniel's section. One of his colleagues asked about security vulnerabilities in AI systems, specifically about risks in rushed implementations. I responded with our security statistics: 0 breaches, 0 data losses, and recognition from 3 independent security firms. More questions followed, each one carefully crafted to cast doubt. I answered them all with facts, figures, and documentation. When someone asked about the blog post alleging whistleblower retaliation, I simply stated that we welcomed scrutiny and had provided full documentation to anyone with legitimate concerns. Then Daniel himself stood up. The room grew quiet. He introduced himself as a former insider and claimed he had evidence that our performance metrics were inflated. He pulled out his laptop, ready to present his proof. That's when conference security approached him. I watched, maintaining my professional composure, as they quietly but firmly asked him to step outside. He protested, his voice rising, insisting he had the right to expose the truth. The audience shifted uncomfortably as security escorted him out. I waited until the doors closed, then continued my presentation. My voice remained steady as I displayed real-time performance data from our live clients. I demonstrated our framework's capabilities through the demos my team had prepared. I answered every remaining question thoroughly and professionally. The applause at the end was genuine. People approached the stage, wanting to learn more, to schedule meetings, to discuss implementations. I directed them to our booth, where my team was ready with detailed information. But the conference wasn't over. That evening at the networking reception, whispers followed me everywhere. Some people avoided me, clearly unsure what to believe. Others sought me out, impressed by how I'd handled the situation. I smiled, shook hands, and focused on the conversations that mattered. Victoria found me on the terrace, where I'd escaped for a moment of quiet. She handed me a glass of water and shared the news. Legal had confirmed that the system attacks originated from Daniel's new employer. Combined with his previous unauthorized access, it was enough to pursue serious legal action. I asked what would happen next. She explained that our company would file charges, and Daniel's new employer would likely terminate him immediately to avoid liability. The industry would know what he'd done. His career in tech was effectively over. The relief I expected didn't come. Instead, I felt tired, deeply, profoundly tired of fighting someone who should have been celebrating my success. Victoria seemed to understand. She squeezed my shoulder and reminded me that tomorrow we'd return to building things that mattered. The next morning brought vindication. Daniel's employer announced they were reassessing their AI strategy and that their consultant had been released. Tech blogs that had run his anonymous post published retractions. Our booth was busier than ever, with companies wanting to learn about our battle-tested framework. But Daniel wasn't finished. Over the following weeks, he tried new tactics. He created a professional review website where anonymous users could rate tech professionals. Somehow, my profile accumulated dozens of negative reviews overnight, all following similar patterns and making similar accusations. My team discovered the site and reported it. Jonathan even built a script that analyzed the writing patterns, proving that most reviews came from the same source. The site was taken down, but not before screenshots circulated on social media. He contacted my alma mater, claiming I cheated on projects during my computer science degree. The department chair called me, bewildered, saying they'd received detailed allegations about assignments from nearly a decade ago. I provided my old project files, still saved on backup drives, showing my work's evolution and originality. Each attack felt smaller, more desperate. Daniel was running out of platforms, out of credibility, out of people willing to listen. But he kept trying, driven by something I couldn't comprehend. The need to destroy what he couldn't possess, the inability to accept that I'd succeeded without him. My work suffered during this period, not the quality. I was too stubborn to let him affect that, but the joy I'd once found in solving problems dimmed under the constant need for vigilance. Every email could be a new attack. Every industry contact might have received his latest story. The turning point came from an unexpected source. A journalist who'd been following the story reached out. She'd investigated Daniel's claims thoroughly and found a pattern. This wasn't his first time. She discovered 2 previous employers where he'd exhibited similar behavior when female colleagues were promoted above him. She wanted to write a story not about the drama, but about the pattern of sabotage that talented women faced in tech, about how systems often failed to protect them, about the resilience required to survive and thrive despite targeted attacks. I agreed to participate with my company's blessing. The article, when published, resonated throughout the industry. Other women shared their stories. Companies began reviewing their policies. Daniel's name became synonymous with the type of toxic behavior the industry was finally ready to address. But I didn't want to be defined by what I'd survived. I wanted to be known for what I'd built. So I returned my focus to the work. Our AI framework expanded to new industries. We solved problems I'd only dreamed about tackling. My team grew, filled with brilliant people who pushed me to be better every day. The legal proceedings against Daniel progressed slowly but steadily. He faced charges for unauthorized system access, corporate espionage, and cyber harassment. His new employer sued him for misrepresentation. The consequences he'd avoided for so long finally caught up. I received updates from our legal team, but tried not to dwell on them. Each court date, each filing, each development was just administrative cleanup. The real victory had already been won. In conference rooms where our framework transformed businesses, in the careers of team members who thrived under good leadership, in the problems we solved that made people's work lives better. 6 months after the conference, I was invited to give a keynote at a Women in Tech Summit. I almost declined, not wanting to be seen as just another victim with a survival story. But Victoria convinced me that my story was about more than survival. It was about building something meaningful despite attempts to tear it down. I spent weeks crafting that keynote, not about Daniel. He received only a brief mention, but about the importance of focusing on the work, about building systems and teams that could withstand attacks, about the power of truth backed by data and determination. The response overwhelmed me. Young women approached afterward, some crying, thanking me for showing them it was possible to win without becoming bitter. Senior women shared their own stories of colleagues who tried to undermine them. Men asked how they could better support their female colleagues facing similar situations. That night, in my hotel room, I finally allowed myself to feel the weight of everything that had happened. The betrayal by someone I'd loved, the months of attacks, the constant vigilance required to protect my work and reputation. I cried for the first time in months, not from sadness, but from exhaustion and relief. The next morning, I awoke feeling lighter. I had breakfast with several women from the conference, and we discussed technical challenges, not personal ones. We debated algorithms and implementation strategies. We shared excitement about projects we were building. It felt like coming home. Returning to work, I found my team had decorated my office with printouts of positive feedback from the keynote. They'd also framed a quote from the journalist's article. She refused to let someone else's limitations define her potential. I hung it next to the photo from our launch party. Daniel's final attempt came through a letter to my parents. He'd somehow found their address and sent them a long, rambling message about how he was concerned for my well-being, how success had changed me, how he only wanted what was best for me. My mother called, furious, not at me, at him. She'd raised a daughter who knew her worth, and she wasn't about to let some insecure man try to undermine that. She'd already contacted their local police about the harassment. My father, typically quiet, got on the phone just to say he was proud of me. That letter accomplished something Daniel never intended. It reminded me that I had support systems he couldn't touch, family who believed in me, colleagues who respected me, an industry that was finally learning to protect its talent from those who would destroy it out of jealousy. The legal consequences finally materialized. Daniel pleaded guilty to multiple charges to avoid trial. He received a suspended sentence, hefty fines, and a permanent restraining order. More importantly for him, he was effectively blacklisted from the tech industry. No company would risk hiring someone with his documented history. I heard he eventually found work in a different field entirely, something in sales, far from the technical work he'd once done. Part of me wondered if he ever reflected on how different things could have been if he'd simply been happy for my success. Most of me didn't care. My focus remained on building. Our AI framework won industry awards. My team published papers on our innovations. We mentored junior developers, especially women entering the field. We created something larger than any individual, a system that would continue improving lives long after we'd moved on to new challenges. On the 2-year anniversary of that boardroom presentation, Victoria promoted me to Vice President of Innovation. The role meant less hands-on coding and more strategic thinking, but I was ready. I'd learned to see the bigger picture, to build systems that could withstand any attack. My acceptance speech was brief. I thanked my team for their brilliance and dedication. I acknowledged the leadership that had supported me through difficult times, and I promised to use my new position to create environments where talent could thrive without fear of sabotage. The apartment I'd once shared with Daniel was long gone. I'd bought a house with a proper home office and space for the garden I'd always wanted. On weekends, I tended to my plants and thought about growth, how it required both strong roots and the ability to reach toward light. Sometimes I still received messages from women facing their own Daniels. I always responded with the same advice. Document everything, build your support network, trust your work, and remember that someone else's inability to handle your success says nothing about your right to achieve it. The tech industry was slowly changing. Stories like mine had forced conversations about toxic behavior and the systems that enabled it. Companies implemented better protections. Men who might have become Daniels learned to celebrate rather than sabotage their colleagues' achievements. But the real victory wasn't in changing hearts and minds. It was in the work itself, the problems solved, the efficiencies created, the innovations that made people's jobs easier and businesses more effective. That's what lasted. That's what mattered. Daniel had tried to make my story about him, about his jealousy, his attacks, his downfall. But he'd failed to understand something fundamental. My story was never about him. It was about building something meaningful, about pushing technology forward, about proving that talent and determination could overcome any obstacle. He became exactly what he deserved to be, a cautionary tale told at conferences and in HR training sessions, a reminder of what happened when personal insecurity tried to destroy professional excellence, a footnote in the larger story of progress. Meanwhile, I kept building new frameworks, new solutions, new teams of brilliant people who pushed boundaries and solved problems. The attacks had tested me, but they'd also revealed something important. I was stronger than I'd known. My work could withstand any scrutiny, and the truth, backed by data and determination, always won in the end. The framework we'd built became an industry standard. Companies around the world implemented variations of our approach. The algorithms I developed while Daniel plotted against me now powered systems that improved millions of lives. That was the ultimate victory, creating something so useful, so necessary, that it transcended any personal drama. Young developers studied our documentation, unaware of the battles fought to protect it. They built upon our foundation, taking the technology in directions I'd never imagined. They saw only the elegant solution, not the chaos that had surrounded its creation. And that's how it should be, because in the end, the work speaks for itself. The code doesn't care about office politics or personal vendettas. The algorithms don't know about betrayal or jealousy. They simply do what they were designed to do, solve problems and make things better. Daniel taught me that lesson, though not in the way he intended. By trying to destroy my work, he'd forced me to make it indestructible. By attacking my reputation, he'd compelled me to build one that could withstand any assault. By attempting to isolate me, he'd shown me how strong my support network truly was. I no longer checked what he was doing or where he'd ended up. That chapter was closed, filed away with other difficult lessons learned. My focus was forward, on the next problem to solve, the next innovation to develop, the next team member to mentor. Because that's what builders do. They don't waste time on those who can only tear down. They keep creating, keep improving, keep pushing forward. They trust that good work speaks louder than any accusation. They know that excellence is the best response to mediocrity. and they never, ever stopped building. The following Monday, I arrived at work to find an unusual email from our biggest client. They wanted an emergency meeting about concerning information they'd received regarding our AI framework. My stomach dropped. Daniel had found another angle. I gathered my team and headed to the client's office. In their conference room, the head of procurement slid a folder across the table. Inside were printouts of emails supposedly from me, discussing plans to overcharge them and hide functionality issues. The timestamps showed they were sent during times I was documented as being in other meetings. Nathan immediately pulled up our email server logs on his laptop. Within minutes, he'd proven the emails were spoofed, sent from external servers designed to mimic our domain. The client's IT director leaned forward, interested in Nathan's forensic approach. What started as an accusation turned into a demonstration of our team's technical expertise. The client not only renewed their contract, but asked us to help strengthen their own email security. As we packed up, their CEO pulled me aside. She mentioned that the person who'd sent them the concerning information had seemed desperate, almost unhinged. She'd already instructed her team to block all further communications from that source. Back at the office, I found Jonathan waiting with more news. Daniel had created a competing framework, or tried to. He'd recruited 2 junior developers from a struggling startup and was shopping it around as a superior alternative to ours. The demo he'd been showing was essentially our old prototype with a different interface. Victoria called an all-hands meeting for our department. She didn't mention Daniel by name, but announced new intellectual property protections and a generous retention bonus program. The message was clear. The company valued its people and would protect both them and their work. That evening, I stayed late reviewing our patent applications with the legal team. We identified 17 unique innovations in our framework that warranted protection. As I signed the paperwork, I realized Daniel's attacks had actually strengthened our position. Every false claim he made had forced us to document our work more thoroughly. The next few weeks brought a strange rhythm. Daniel would attempt something. A fake LinkedIn profile claiming to be a satisfied customer warning about our failures, anonymous tips to industry regulators about supposed compliance violations, even a poorly made website comparing his framework to ours. Each time, we'd document, report, and continue working. My team developed a dark humor about it. Nathan created a Daniel detection algorithm that flagged suspicious activity patterns. Jonathan started a wall chart tracking days without incident. Even our newest team members, who joined after the drama began, treated it as background noise rather than a real threat. Then came the industry awards deadline. Our framework had been nominated for Innovation of the Year. The selection committee would review not just the technology, but also its implementation, impact, and the team behind it. Victoria insisted I lead our submission. I spent days crafting our entry, highlighting not just what we'd built, but how we'd built it, ethically, collaboratively, with extensive testing and validation. My team contributed case studies, metrics, and testimonials from the departments using our framework. The final submission was less about winning and more about documenting our journey. 2 days after we submitted, the awards committee contacted us. They'd received an anonymous complaint alleging our submission contained falsified data. They were required to investigate. I provided our audit trails, third-party validations, and real-time access to our systems. The investigation took less than a day to clear us completely. The investigator, off the record, mentioned this was the 3rd time someone had tried to discredit our submission. Each attempt had been more desperate than the last. He advised us to maintain our documentation practices, not for the investigation, but as an example for other companies facing similar challenges. Meanwhile, Daniel's competing framework was floundering. The developers he'd recruited reached out to me through LinkedIn, asking if we had any openings. They described a chaotic environment where Daniel promised big contracts that never materialized, blamed everyone else for failures, and spent more time plotting against us than improving his product. I forwarded their messages to HR, who handled the situation professionally. We couldn't hire them immediately. It would look like poaching. But we made note of their information for future opportunities. Even in victory, we had to maintain ethical standards. The turning point came during a routine security audit. Our IT team discovered something interesting in our server logs. For months, someone had been attempting to access our systems using old credentials, rotating through various IP addresses to avoid detection. The attempts were clumsy, desperate, and increasingly frequent. Nathan cross-referenced the timestamps with Daniel's public activities. The correlation was perfect. Every time Daniel faced a setback, a rejected pitch, a failed demo, a lost opportunity, there would be a spike in attempted breaches. He was trying to steal updates to our framework to keep his competing product relevant. This time, we didn't just document, we set a trap. Nathan created a honeypot, A fake server with convincing, but ultimately useless code. We made it just vulnerable enough to be tempting. Then we waited. It took 3 days. Late on a Thursday night, someone took the bait. They downloaded gigabytes of carefully crafted nonsense code that looked sophisticated but did nothing. Documentation that referenced non-existent features. Roadmaps for impossible integrations. Nathan tracked every keystroke, every download, every attempt to cover their tracks. The forensic evidence was overwhelming. The access came from Daniel's home IP address, using techniques identical to his previous breaches. He'd even logged into his personal email from the same session, creating an unbreakable chain of evidence. We had him. Victoria handled the next steps with her usual precision. Our legal team filed criminal charges for the new breaches. Daniel's previous suspended sentence made this much more serious. Within a week, he was arrested at his apartment, his computers seized as evidence. The news spread through our industry network quickly but quietly. No press releases, no public statements. Just professionals sharing information about a security threat that had been neutralized. Daniel's framework disappeared overnight. His website went dark. His social media accounts were deleted. I received a call from one of the developers who'd worked with him. They wanted me to know that Daniel had spent his final days at their startup ranting about conspiracies against him, claiming I had connections in high places, that the entire industry was rigged. They'd recorded some of his outbursts, concerned for their own safety. The recordings revealed someone completely detached from reality. Our client base grew. The framework expanded to new markets. We published papers, spoke at conferences, and mentored the next generation of developers. The work continued, stronger than ever. Daniel's name became a cautionary footnote, mentioned only when discussing security protocols or professional ethics. The award ceremony was held at a hotel downtown. Our entire team attended, wearing matching t-shirts Jonathan had designed with our framework's logo. When they announced we'd won Innovation of the Year, I brought everyone on stage with me. This wasn't my victory, it was ours. In my acceptance speech, I talked about resilience and innovation, how the best ideas are tested not just technically but ethically, how true success comes from building something useful, defending it with integrity, and never letting detractors derail the mission. I didn't mention Daniel once. He'd already taken up too much space in our story. The aftermath was surprisingly quiet. Industry publications covered our win with straightforward articles about the framework's capabilities. Competitors reached out to discuss partnerships rather than trying to replicate our work. New clients approached us based on merit, not drama. I promoted Nathan to lead security architect. His vigilance had saved us countless times. Jonathan became team lead, his steady presence anchoring our expanding group. We hired those developers who'd escaped Daniel's startup, integrating them into a team that valued collaboration over competition. My new house became a gathering place for team dinners and strategy sessions. The garden I'd planted was thriving, each section carefully planned but allowed to grow naturally. It reminded me of our framework, structured but adaptable, rooted but reaching upward. One evening, while reviewing quarterly metrics with Victoria, she mentioned that Daniel had been sentenced to 18 months in minimum security prison. He'd also been ordered to pay restitution for the damages his attacks had caused. The amount was substantial but would likely never be collected. He had nothing left. I felt no satisfaction at the news, no vindication, just a quiet relief that it was truly over. We'd won not by destroying him, but by continuing to build, by refusing to let his attacks define us, by focusing on what mattered: the work, the team, the problems we solved. The framework's 2-year anniversary approached. We'd helped transform dozens of companies, trained hundreds of developers, and created a new standard for AI integration. Universities taught courses based on our methodology. Open-source communities built extensions for specialized industries. I still received messages from people facing their own Daniels. My advice evolved, but the core remained: document everything, build your support network, trust your work, and remember that the best response to someone trying to tear you down is to keep building up. At the anniversary celebration, held in our newly expanded office space, I looked around at what we'd created, not just the framework or the company's success, but the community. People who supported each other, who celebrated collective victories, who understood that true innovation requires both brilliant ideas and the courage to defend them. Victoria raised a toast to the future, to new challenges, new solutions, new possibilities. We clinked glasses and returned to our conversations about upcoming projects. Daniel wasn't mentioned once. He'd become what he'd always been, a temporary obstacle in a much larger journey. That night, I updated my LinkedIn profile, not with awards or titles, but with a simple statement: building things that matter. Because in the end, that's what survived. Not the drama or the attacks or the legal battles, but But the work itself, the solutions we'd created, the problems we'd solved, the future we were building. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister. She'd seen the award announcement and wanted to congratulate me. Her message was simple. Mom says you're unstoppable now. I smiled, thinking about that word, unstoppable, not because I defeated an enemy, but because I'd learned to build beyond any attack. The next morning came with new challenges. A client needed help with a complex integration. A team member had an innovative idea worth exploring. The framework needed updates to accommodate emerging technologies. The work continued, as it always had, as it always would. Daniel was serving his sentence somewhere, facing the consequences of his choices. I was in my office, surrounded by brilliant people, solving problems that mattered. We'd both ended up exactly where our actions had led us. The truth, as always, had emerged in the data. And I was still here,